Okay, and we are good to go. Hello, everybody. Good day wherever you are tuning in from, and welcome to this webinar. Today, we're talking about menu mastery, what you need to know about food costing and menu costing. We are hosting this from Singapore. This is brought to you by Foodraiser. Foodraiser is an online application that helps restaurant businesses worldwide digitize their invoices, manage their costs, and streamline the ordering process. I'm joined today by a few amazing speakers from all over the world. We start with Sean. Sean, you may have heard on his podcast, Principle of Hospitality, and he also founded Open Pantry, which is a hospitality consultant based in Australia. We also have Ben. Chef Ben has been in F&B for 9 years in New York. He's worked with many different chefs, and in 2017 he opened Tonkatsu, which was a fast casual Japanese restaurant business in Lower Manhattan. We are expecting one more speaker, Mark, who also runs a hospitality consulting boutique business in Western Australia. See if he is able to join a little bit later. And last but not least, I'll be emceeing the conversation today. My name is Alf, and I am the CEO of Foodraiser. Before we begin, Sean and Ben, let's hear some introductory remarks from you guys. If you want to talk a bit about Tonkatsu or a bit about Open Pantry or the podcast, please tell us a bit more about yourselves.
Cool.
Sure. You want me to go first, Sean?
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey guys. A little bit about me. I spent about 9 years in the restaurant industry, but prior to that, I actually went to the University of California at Los Angeles, and I was studying engineering before I dropped out and got into the econ and accounting department because I wanted to run my own business. And, it took me about 10 years before I opened my own little restaurant business in Manhattan. And Tonkatsu was sort of an evolving idea in my mind as I went through different restaurants, worked with different chefs in Manhattan, and saw all the pitfalls and all the goods and bads. And I changed my dream restaurant from like a 40 to 50 seat kind of like bistro thing into like a 8-seat fast casual kind of operation in Manhattan. Yeah, and I was lucky enough to kind of sell and get out before COVID happened. And now I'm in Singapore studying an MBA, actually. Yeah, that's me.
Nice.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. And thanks, Alf. Pleasure to be on today. So thanks for asking me. So I come from just over 23 years in the industry. Born and bred in a city called Adelaide in South Australia, and was a baker's assistant with a big bakery group, one of the biggest retail bakeries in Australia called Bakes Delight. So I started my career quite early, 5 o'clock starts, those kind of things, working in bakeries, got a love for bread, grew up sort of through that and decided to own my own bakery at the age of 21 in South Australia. And then buy a second one by the age of 25, 26, somewhere around there. Let them go after about 5 or 6 years. Decided to work for that particular brand in Vancouver for a short period of time and start to open up some bakeries for them over there. And decided I wanted to come back to Australia. Worked in coffee for a little bit of time before sort of in 2008 got asked to join a small brand at that time, which was called Grilled. So most people would know Grilled as a healthy burger venue in Australia. At that point, they had about 10 or 12 restaurants and worked with them for 6 or 7 years across Melbourne, Brisbane, and in Perth, and opened up a number of restaurants for them as a restaurant manager, area manager, those kind of things, and really got to see how brands scale and what they need to do well in systems and processes in order to make their brands run a lot smoother. Then I came to Melbourne, where I'm residing now, about 6 or 7 years ago. Started to work for some independent restaurants before starting my own consultancy, and have gone back and worked for a couple of brands solely as a employees well during that time, like Centuro and Laneway Greens and a couple of others as well. And then Alf obviously mentioned the podcast. The podcast is something I started sort of on a whim about 4 years ago, when I just had friends who were sick of me saying I really should have been on radio or should have started a podcast. So I did, and started interviewing my mates. And that's grown to something which now is called Principle of Hospitality, which I co-found with an amazing gentleman called Sash, who has a design agency called Principle Design here in Melbourne. And we're building something which is really a storyteller for the industry. And we're about 150 episodes in. So we're really, really privileged to have the conversations we do from people all around the world, but obviously centric on Australia. So that's kind of where I am at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean, and congratulations on the podcast. Finally, we have Mark. Mark, thank you for jumping in. As I gave a very quick intro about what you're doing over at Executive Compass, but perhaps you want to introduce yourself briefly before we get the discussion started.
Thanks, Alf. Look, my business commenced about 5 years ago, and the process of that was after leaving a global catering company my position was overseeing the state for a company called Delaware North, which included 2 stadia, and prior to that, 30 good years in the industry. So it's been quite an enjoyable process. My background commenced at 16 years of age as a waiter in a restaurant. I moved into management and then into hotels, and I was general manager with Accor Hotels for 10 years. So I'm at that stage in life where I'm enjoying sharing my knowledge and my experience with a good raft of clients. They vary at the moment from tourism councils across our state, fairly nice contracts with local tourism organisations, sporting clubs, associations, and small to medium-sized enterprises. So it's good to be here.
Excellent, and thank you for joining us. And so, we have a lot of experience combined with our 3 speakers, and let's get this conversation started. So we're talking today about food costing and menu costing. The way I'm envisioning the conversation for today, in a relatively informal basis, let's start a little bit with the theory, a mini informal masterclass, as it were, about what are some principles that you should keep in mind while you're thinking about costing your menu, and then maybe draw a little bit on the experience of what we've seen, from Ben directly, how he went about it, and also in your experience, Mark and Sean, working with different custom clients, about how it actually went down, and then maybe some recommendations as to how we can get closer to that ideal theory that we mentioned in the beginning to wrap things up. Does that sound like a good plan to everybody?
Sounds great.
Okay. So let's start with some very basic guiding points, right? So what is when we're talking about menu costing, what are we actually talking about? How do we go about pricing our different menu items? We want to start with maybe with Sean.
Yeah, cool. I think I was pretty fortunate when I started my career in that I was in bigger businesses to start with, where costing, cost of goods was always a thing that we talked about straight away. And then when I moved into independent brands sort of later in my career, it's been something which I've been making sure that I'm developing into those brands, because it's something which is probably the lowest hanging fruit, but something we sometimes don't think about. So I think for me, menu costing is really breaking down the actual cost of every ingredient and making sure that it is accounted for, and whether that be something you're making in house and making sure that labor component is there as part of it as well, or something you're getting from a big supplier. But the most important thing is that you do understand the actual cost of goods of that product, because what we've seen arguably in the last 10 to 20 years is menu pricing not really moving very much, but obviously the cost of ingredients moving a lot. And sometimes, especially with independent brands, we're not we're not thinking about stock taking. We're not thinking about wastage. We're not thinking about pilferage as much as we definitely need to. So I think those fundamentals are critically important. And as I said, some low-hanging fruit, which we probably need to do better as an industry in making sure we're addressing sooner.
Excellent. Mark, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting topic, obviously the theme of today as a whole. It doesn't really vary from my raft of sites. We generally put the pressure on the chef to deliver a costed menu. I say we as in either owners, investors or managers. And I think there's become a bit more of an understanding in today's life that the chefs are actually the creative side. They're not the accountants. And we expect them to provide spreadsheets and data analysis to be able to give a manager or an owner a costed menu that can then be priced. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen, and so we need to be in the back foot. We need to be the support mechanism to the chef and let them be creative, let them do what they have the skills and have developed over the years. And I think, like your software and like those who are in advanced fields, you have to sit with your chef. You have to sit with the person that's actually behind the creation and work them through the numbers. And I think if you leave it to them, you're leaving it open, and it's not a detriment to a chef. Let's keep them where they're meant to be. This hasn't changed for me in 30 odd years. I may have started off in the early days thinking that chefs were the accountants and they were responsible and accountable for that. But you've got to be there to support them. And so your style of software and what we're here to talk about is, let's get it accurate. Let's share the responsibilities and let's make it as efficient and effective as we can. And let's not badger the poor people that are trying to create this.
Awesome. Okay, so lesson number one: chefs are not accountants, and we can't expect them to be, right? I mean, that's not what they're here to do. That's great. So and just going back to Sean's point, I mean, why is this important, right? I mean, of course, you want to be like, what are the consequences of pricing it wrong? Of costing it wrong, and then well, let's start with costing it wrong, right? I guess that the answer is going to be it's going to affect your price. But can we do a little bit of a deeper dive there? Like, what are there some rules of thumb from costing to pricing that people should keep in mind, or something that we tend to, any places where we tend to underestimate? So you had mentioned earlier. I wasn't quite clear, honestly. Like, do we include the cost of labor in that, or do we just think about food? Do we think about the potential cost of, you only have a certain number of ovens, let's say, to bake your goods. So do you need to think about that as well when you're costing the menu, or not necessarily?
Yeah, look, I believe you do. I think it really depends on the brand, right? And it depends on what the goals are for the brand. So I've had a recent customer who does a lot of their own sauces, and they're starting to scale, but they're at the start of their journey, right? But if Mark was doing, and so therefore they're not thinking about the labor component, the fact that it might take 2 to 3 hours to make a sauce, which will last them a week, right? But I'm sure with Mark, with his clients who are obviously bigger, if they didn't think about the labor component to make a sauce or make a component inside their venue, then that is dramatically going to change that price. So I think it really depends on the brand and their expectations moving forward, Alf. So I suppose that's what I'd probably say to that. I think the other thing we don't think about is the fact that seasonality can obviously change price points. And it's something that happens a lot in QSR brands, especially in things like bakeries. Obviously, things like flour prices change, seasonally, right? So we need to factor that into the ongoing price over a period of a year, or how often we have a price review. And I say to most of my clients, we should look at doing that seasonally. We should look at the menu seasonally, how we price our menu seasonally, our supply chain seasonally, or every 6 months, to make sure that we're keeping up with demand, because a cost of goods could be anywhere between 10% for something that's a high value item, super low cost, that is something you could, a $7 or $8 price point, up to 30 or 35% for something of a main item, right, which has got high quality Wagyu or something like that. So you need to make sure it's all relative as well.
Yeah. Good point. I think we talk about reporting, and a sales mix is going to be your compass, right? And there's a market segmentation that will say this is who are going to eat from us. These are the people who are going to buy our products, and you may not want a market that's going to eat nothing but hamburgers and hot chips, and you want the market that's all the Wagyu crew. But to be honest, the hot chips and the burgers are making all the margin, and the Wagyu's got nothing going for it. It's the same in booze as well, But you're right. The price volatility is probably the most challenging part. And we had contracts that were Australia-wide on suppliers, and I can tell you now there are still errors that come through from suppliers despite signed contracts on pricing, and so to keep the eye on that is very tough, right? To watch those invoices, process them, and see the variance is really, really tough. And we're expecting these chefs to do this, right? And this is just where the gaps start to occur. So if we can't keep on top of how the prices vary, and some of them, no matter what your contract is, it's an error somewhere in the process of these large companies. And some of them are small businesses. We're dealing with small independent businesses because they make a premium boutique product, and the error is just right in front of them. They've made the error, but we haven't raised it to their attention. So again, I put it back to support, and whether that support is electronic and digital or whether the support is through people, we need to make sure that the chefs are getting the support and the process has been put in place to stop those gaps.
I love that, because connecting this with what Sean was saying earlier, the price for the customers tends to be fixed, right? And that is kind of based on the assumption that initial cost that was given for the menu is kind of the cost, whereas in fact the cost does this, right? It'll be changing over time depending on the changes of prices of particular ingredients. How do you, and that of course, being able to understand it and really understanding what the cost is what it actually is now and what it might be in the future is going to be helpful. And I think that's where digital tools can come in, right? But how do you kind of account for that variance in your pricing? Because it might not be so realistic for customers it could be going for that $11 burger, and then one day on Tuesday it's $12, and then on Thursday it's back to $10. So what's any recommendations or what have you seen works well for accounting for or buffering for that variance?
Yeah.
I guess we're moving rhythm here, Mark.
Okay.
I think probably going back to what I said just before about looking at your menu pricing every 3 months. It really depends on the type of offering now. A cafe is not going to change their coffee price every 3 months, but they might change it every 9 to 12 months, right? Depending on their supply chain. So I think having that buffer there, as we do with things like wastage. And in some cases, especially with booze and things like pilferage and overpour and all that kind of stuff, you need to sort of build that in to make sure that you're hitting the percentage that you want. And that, as I said before, that's going to be different in different kinds of venue. I think most hospitality establishments are somewhere between 20 to 30% cost of goods. And I think if you can account for wastage, pilferage, differences in the recipe changes and all that kind of stuff and seasonality in that, then I think you're probably okay, because most wages these days are going to sit in the same sort of barometer, and then you need to make sure you're making money. I think the thing that we need to move forward with, and FoodRaiser being such a great platform in order to control your cost of goods, is making sure that we're looking at that top line revenue and making sure we're actually making money out of these businesses. And that's the critical thing with a tech product like FoodRaiser, is it actually makes businesses focus on what's important and what is moving inside their businesses, which is food and beverage, and having some controls around that is always going to be a positive thing.
Hey, and I'm glad you said wastage and pilferage, because it's a piece that we add to all of my clients' costings. So as sharp as we make it on the spreadsheet, it's actually a percentage value that we add, and we sit at around 7.5% on top of all costs. So when we finish the process and we've done all the ingredients, the last piece we have is the line that automatically calculates the subtotal, adds 7.5% and moves forward. And that's for the majority of restaurants. Large-scale catering into the likes of stadia, sporting codes that are turning over high volume, that value can be in the teens. So we used to have around 12 to 14% wastage at Domain Stadium,
Wow.
So that is, what I used to watch it when I first entered the industry, that particular part of the industry, and I used to just watch volumes getting put out. And obviously nowadays it goes to food banks to support homeless and the like, but the amount of wastage is just before the teens. We're in that 11, 12% mark. So we put it into costings now, and certain companies also have leases where their lease costs are built into their percentage of revenue. So I have seen people putting those in, and I think a big part is in the retail game, there's a heck of a lot of packaging that often gets eliminated from the costing as well. So whether it's a cardboard clam, or whether it's wrapped, or whether it's in some form of packaging, that's often left off. And I think that's really important to be included when we're talking about the costing for retail fast food. They're another factor. I also deal with a lot of non-for-profit organisations, sporting clubs, and quite often the local cricket club or the football club or golf clubs, sailing clubs, they go on forever. They run at a low profit margin, so their pricing is actually set to achieve a 50% cost of sale. So when we start breaking down those menus, you're watching them, costing them up, and you think, oh, this is going to break. But the business still has a sales mix. They're still going to get $8 for chips because they still see that but they're selling an eye fillet at around 30 or 28 bucks, and you just sort of a heart's beating away thinking they're going to, but it still relies on that sales mix to give them a break even. So every company's different. They all have a different layer. They all have a different outcome. The strategy behind each business is slightly varied. So you've got to play with the game as well.
And I can only assume that this becomes all the more important, especially during the pandemic, when you're trying to, you need to be so careful about all your costs. You want to bring that wastage from like a 7 point, you'll never be able to fully remove it, right? But you want to reduce that as much as you can. But seeing as how Ben did manage to sell his business before the pandemic, you know what? Let's hear a little bit from Ben and your experience either in tonkatsu or in the other restaurants that you were working with.
Sure.
What we were learning from Sean and Mark. How does this resonate? Starting from the very beginning of like the chef having to like create and also like do that accounting bit that is maybe not as fun.
Exactly. That's something that I found really fascinating going through my my process, my journey. Like I came into it with a background in accounting and economics because I knew like you need to know like the basics to run a business, right? And I figured all the managers and chefs I worked with, they had that kind of know-how. And just like what Mark was saying, like, dude, they're creatives. They know how to run the operation. They know the basics that were handed down from chefs that trained them, right? But it was really, really, I'll use the word again, basic. They would aim for maybe like 25 to 33% food cost. Mm-hmm. And choosing those kind of numbers would make it really easy for them to like price the menu. Because if you're you're going for 25% food cost, you take your estimated, they don't do it too accurately, estimated cost of goods or raw materials and food and stuff, and you multiply it by 4. Boom, that's your like number. Or if it's a higher margin thing, like a big old hunk of tomahawk steak, it might be like 33 to 35% food cost. You just multiply the cost of the steak by 3. So that's one of those basic things that they would do to set like a price. And over the course of my journey, I started really helping them like put things down into spreadsheets using Excel, not just hand calculated stuff, not so much paper, written down stuff on paper and doing calculations manually, right? And I think that's what really helped me get into the position where I was to be like almost a consulting chef for one or two different restaurant openings before I had the balls to open my own business myself, But I think what Mark said about chefs not having that capability is definitely very true. Especially in my early days when I was working for the larger corporations, they had the accounting department. They would have for Daniel Boulud's Dynex Corporation, the chefs were just running the operations, very minimal food costing and things like that with the numbers, using that basic kind of framework of just multiplying by about 3 or 4 to get that food price. And then, at the end of the month, they would have meetings with the accounting team to really fine tune it. And over time, you'd have you could maintain your food costs and things like that with that kind of back and forth feedback to support the chefs. But I think that's what I saw over the course of my 10 years as a chef and owner.
So it sounds like it's more like, okay, well, we want to have keep costs at 25%. So this is more or less what it should be. So it's an approximation. Well, actually, what actually blows my mind about what you just said is the fact that it's on paper. So sometimes when people ask me, who is your biggest competitor, right, at FoodRaiser, and the answer always depends a little bit on the market. So for example, in the US, there are a lot more solutions like what we do. And so, I'm able to name a few of those. But for example, in Singapore and in some of the other markets that we operate in, I usually say that my competitor is the Excel spreadsheet, right? Because for me, the Excel spreadsheet is already is already suboptimal. But it sounds like actually it's even, from what you're saying, it's even they're not even there yet. It's
Your
on paper.
competitor's the pencil.
To clarify better, this was 10 to 12 years ago, though. The first 5 years of my life, most chefs were not using Excel well. They were just writing stuff down on clipboards, passing it off to the accounting, doing that kind of stuff. They wouldn't deal with the spreadsheets and stuff like that, or
the
record
tome
their
of
data.
recipes passed from generation to generation.
The recipes would barely be digitalized. It would be handwritten and then photocopied until we started, implementing. And I was working with more, I would say, modern chefs who would have everything recorded on, Google Drive and things like that. You could, have your sous chefs, everyone update it live, and more integrated communication versus just handwritten kind of notes. Yeah.
It's funny because the old factor 4. It makes me laugh because they're actually cutting themselves in the foot, because there's so many items that take a multiplication of about a 10 or a 20, and in some cases 30. You don't get cost of sales on like calamari and some of these items. You're getting your cost of sales there, and 12%, 10%. Hot chips at about 5% and burgers at 12, 14%. Yeah, so the multiplication fact actually shoots them in the foot if they flatline it. So the learning's happening though. You quite often see it starting to change now. Yeah.
So sorry, Mark, what you're saying there is that depending on the type of food item, you shouldn't just be multiplying by 4. It actually kind of depends a little. You have to match it a little bit to the demand, right? To the willingness to pay. Is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a combination of things. Just pull a cauliflower apart. They're in trend at the moment. Everyone ticks them. They're a health product. They're a fad. But the cost of the cauliflower, whilst it is going up, the fact is that if we actually produce that item, grill it off, put the flavour profiles together and lay it on a plate, you can charge a value to the factor of 4, and you're probably selling the thing at $3. So it's not going to sell at $3. It's going to sell it at 12 to 14. It might be a side. It might be a feature. It's what you layer into it. Suddenly you're layering dairy products into it and you're layering a few other items, by the time you finish with it, it could be a $15, $18 entree, it could be a shared plate, it could be something that comes quite natural to a chef to put together. But if we multiply the factor 4 by it, you've just lost a huge lot of opportunity to make a margin. So crazy use of a cauliflower, but that's, as an example, these are the margin items that we miss.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bread.
Sorry to cut you off. But yeah, so like with sides and things like that, like for instance, like a mac and cheese, you might add like another adjective, like a lobster mac and cheese or bacon mac and cheese. The food cost might be like $1.50, but we'll charge $12 to $15 on it. But those are the side things that you want to tag along with your like main, like the higher food cost items. So you really hit those margins, like you guys were mentioning about fish and chips, or the chips and stuff that go with your meal, right? Yeah. So chefs do think about that, but they don't. I feel like most of them that I've worked with don't really theorize it or really, if that makes sense. It's just they know to do it.
Yeah.
They know to have like that sales mix and like different menu items at different food costs and things like that. But yeah.
And Ben, with this question of wastage, Mark's magic number is 7.5%, sometimes more. Did you know what that number was?
So when Mark and Sean, they're talking about like the big scale kind of production, so it's definitely much easier to incorporate that kind of stuff. But for most of the operations that I've worked in, like maybe 40 to 80 seat kind of restaurants in Manhattan to like smaller 20 seat restaurants to my own 10 seat restaurant, that is already factored in almost into like your food costs and stuff. It's something that you don't really think about, it's just part of it, I would say. Don't know if that hurts or helps. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about that. Like this, are you leaving value on the table by just kind of assuming that it's there, or kind of like what we were just mentioning, like the cauliflower that you're not pricing right just because you're doing it purely based on what it costs and multiplying it by some kind of rule of thumb?
So for the chefs and people that I've worked with, they're extremely hardcore about maintaining, like nothing really goes bad, and when it does, it all hell breaks loose kind of thing. So that's it's very minimal. And once your operations are so streamlined, you will know exactly how much to order and things like that. You have all your data and demand kind of forecasts in a way that you'll have very minimal spoilage and wastage, I would say. And because you can get, at least for my smaller restaurant, deliveries and orders like 2 or 3 times a week, I don't have to keep that much inventory. And it's very hard for things to actually go bad or spoil due to being forgotten about in a fridge. So, and I found that to be kind of common with all the restaurants I worked in, because the chefs were really good with operations. We would have weekly inventory checks, and that's something very important to check for in terms of food costing, and also to check the quality of everything. And we would do like full on once a week, take out everything from the walk-in coolers and stuff, like having those good kind of routines, to really minimize this wastage. However, like what Mark and Sean, like the scale they work out, if there's any gaps in operational management, I think there could be like just things going bad in the corner of a giant walk-in in like a stadium kind of thing, and then it just happens, right? But in my experience, it's a very very small percentage.
I think it's scalable. As you grow, as you end up with more facilities and more venues, even in the one destination, one kitchen with 4 satellites or 20 satellites for a stadium, you have no end of that unfortunate wastage, and it occurs. The spillage just occurs organically, and in some cases it's not even operator error. It's just the way things are. And we would roll out 2,000 casual staff to run a stadium event on a game day, and where do they come from? They're not there every day. Yeah, that's a once a week. Now, at the moment, we've got worse than ever. We've never seen such shortage in staff, but up until recent times, and we've got the grand final coming here to Perth, right? And we've been working with them and a number of different clients on how to cope over the weekend of the grand final. Right, so you have a very fast-moving workforce, and so you have a high risk in quality, portion control, standards, and the list goes on. So, yeah, it is different. If you can bring it back and compact it into one venue, one operation, one team, you're minimising those costs pretty quickly. That's
absolutely,
that's how you get some efficiency.
That's what I've seen is successful as well on the bigger brands. Like it's quite funny when I've walked into bigger brands and I think they've got better systems and processes, and sometimes they don't. And stock taking and making sure they understand their menu and understand their pricing and supply chain, all those kind of things. If you've got bad systems and challenging systems and processes at the start, they just extrapolate as you get bigger, right? Like unless you're focused on it. So I think things like stock taking every week, especially things like alcohol and proteins and all that kind of stuff that is really, the expensive part of what we do in hospitality, is a no-brainer. Is if you take nothing from this conversation, stock take. Like, at least you know then where your money is, because I was always taught from an early age that stock that is sitting on shelves that is not moving is dead money, and we need to make sure that we're rotating that stock, just for not making sure it goes bad, but just making sure we don't have cash in a cool room or on a shelf. And I think in the brands that Mark sort of works with, things like spillage and wastage and those kind of things, because you are dealing with such transactional stuff, that is almost worked into the recipe, right? Like that's why he can talk about 7.5% and I nearly fall off my chair, because if I was working in a QSR brand, like the major QSR brand I work with, when we started, really focusing on supply chain, 3% was good. And then when I left, it was 0.8, right? And we were doing competitions to make sure the wastage was super, super low, because it's millions of dollars across hundreds of sites. And you need to make sure that you're controlling that. Where when you're throwing out product, when you can't reutilize product, especially in brands that aren't independent restaurants and can't change a cauliflower into a different kind of recipe, then you're stuck with it. What are you going to do? Unfortunately, you're probably going to throw it out. And that's an awful thing, just by way of throwing out product, but also obviously money. So
yeah. It's also much cheaper sometimes just to throw things out in a restaurant, which is really, really sad,
Yes. Yeah.
So you're mentioning like stock take. That's super labor intensive though, isn't it?
Yes.
Especially when you have to tie it to all of those costs, and you have to also, if you want to calculate the wastage, you also have to tie it to the sales data, presumably, right?
Mm-hmm.
To know how much there should be and compared to how much there's actually left. And obviously that's where I think digital tools fit in, but like in terms of, are you able to estimate like how much, or maybe Ben, from your experience, like how much time are you spending every day, every week, like doing all of this stuff, the stock taking, the calculations?
Yeah. So ideally you do it once a month, like bare minimum once a month, to really get like an accurate, how much beginning inventory you had at the beginning and what you're ending up with. So you actually see what you're really spending that month on your food, right? But some of the other chefs I worked with were much more anal about having really fine-tuned numbers for the owners. So I might be doing that once a week and running through the restaurant or asking a few other cooks under me to, weigh like this freaking wall of spices, that might have like saffron and stuff by like the grams, and to like jugs of sauces, to 50 kilo like bags of potatoes, like how many of those I got. I would say it goes up to 5 hours depending on the restaurant size, like 2 to 5 hours. 2 if I'm getting really quick at estimating, but in the beginning it would take me 5 hours a week, I would say, out of my day to do things like that. Yeah.
Does that resonate with what you guys have seen as well, with different types of restaurants too?
Yeah, I think it depends. It depends on couple of factors. Obviously, how big the venue is, how easy it is to get the stock, how many off-site storerooms you have, and probably the critical one, Alf, is like how organised you are. If you're not organised, if you can't easily dictate how much is in a bottle, weighing something, it's really, really important. So I think the low-hanging fruit, the expensive proteins, but even like Benjamin looking at his spice rack, it's really important for him to understand how much saffron is there, because it's a really high-end spice and really, really expensive. But maybe the dried oregano isn't something that you're going to really, take a whole lot of time to make sure you've got the weight right in order to get that right. But I think 2 to 3 hours a week is probably where it stands for most venues that I've worked in and done stock takes for.
I suppose I would look at it from a couple of angles. I have new clients are generally lacking in that area. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be a client. They've usually got everything ticked.
True.
Pardon me, but it's interesting. I had 10 years with Accor Hotels. They're a global group who run accommodation as their core business. Yet all of my hotels had food and beverage outlets. And having been born through that space, I tended to lean always to that area. But we always ran that monthly P&L, and the P&L was reliant upon one thing that was always the delay part, and that was the stock take. So we would stock take chemicals, we would stock take everything, right? And but we always used a changing process. So an accountant or accounts clerk or payroll officer, there'd be a raft of different people who would be involved in the stock take, including me as the GM. I'd get down there and count the stock, so that we had a change every single month in who was actually counting the stock, which really helps give you a little bit more of a line ball on where it's going. Because the old story is that the chef counts his own stock, the bar manager counts his own booze, and what we find is that it's always going to be exactly the same. So we get the theoretical stock take, which comes from the point of sale and the amount that we get reported. We know what we're aiming for, but we don't release that until we've seen the stock take, and then blind count, ready to go. We also have, on occasions when we've found that we've got issues, is we'll do isolated stock counts on certain lines. It may just be the dairy, or it might just be protein, or it could be a particular line, fish, for example, and we'll count it every single day. So it really depends on where we're heading with any problems that exist. But nice to have more staff involved in it and different people with hands on. It also creates a message and sends a message to everyone that, hang on, these guys, they're doing all this. This is going to be cool. Mm-hmm. Particularly booze, right? But food in particular, we've got it's just as risky losing a dozen eggs as it is losing a bottle of wine. So there's no variance.
And Mark, how do you? I mean, the problem with connecting what we're seeing at Food Razor, one of the challenges is when you're trying to connect the sales data, which is in terms of item names like dish names, and then connecting that to the cost data, which is in terms of ingredients, unless you, I cannot imagine how people do this in a manual way, because I feel like you're just spending all day connecting those ingredients to the different dishes. I feel like this is really where what we're trying to solve for here as kind of one of our, as part of our product roadmap. And it's fascinating, but like even doing this in an automated way, there's a lot of room for error, and you want to make sure you get it right, because if you don't get it right, you're back to square one. How do you do it? That connection?
Well, firstly you've got to identify you've got a problem, and that's stage 100%. We're really happy we're achieving a 40% cost to sale. Okay, wow, that's excellent. What else will we do then? We've got to go out and fix that. So identify where the issue is, and then start stripping it back. And I think, like we mentioned, you get a sales mix report that provides you what's your highest moving items. There is no point looking at an item that moves, in the bottom half of the sales mix. Just look at the top 4 items. Look at the top 3 items. You could change 50 cents on an item, and if it's at the top, in the top 3, you've just made a heck of a lot of difference to the output. If you've got an even spread and every single item is sold evenly across your whole menu, then it's going to take a bit more work. But generally, you'll find on a sales mix, if you look at your top 3 to top 5 items that are selling, that's where your anomalies are going to be, and then you start stripping it back from there. So, you may well have an issue with portion control on the top 3 items, right? It may well be that we've missed that invoice that has a cost item that has just suddenly gone up. An ingredient item's just gone through the roof or incorrectly coded. How many? The list goes on. What we do need is what we've been leading towards, and that is an isolated stock management system that also connects to the items that are all linked to a recipe, and the recipe flows through. And then you're also doing your purchase orders off it. The whole thing flows beautifully.
Yeah, so we've started here at FoodRaiser. We've started doing that with a couple of clients on a bit of a bespoke basis. We're trying it out. It's even in an automated way, it's challenging, right? There's different things, like you add seasonality, right? So you add different recipes. There's maybe multiple products or multiple ingredients that you can use for any particular recipe as well. Wow, it's challenging, but even then, the time gains that our clients get are just crazy. Like, they're so happy, right? All they have to do is go to the pantry and take and do the physical stock take, which is, as Ben said, still going to take 2 to 5 hours every week. Wow, but at least you don't have to do the rest.
Well, theoretically, is only one thing, isn't it? I mean, the theory is what the computer says. The reality is what's on the shelf.
Different. Exactly.
Hey, eventually, ideally, in the future, all modern restaurants, I'm sure, will have just scales and like video cameras that catch and count for you, and constantly be taking up live feeds of your inventory. Right? I feel like
mini bars. Just go back to mini bars. I know this is being a bit hotel-y like, but you can't take from the modern mini bar. You can't take an item from it. You have I think it's one of the tightest versions. The minute the bottle's lifted, it's calculated and charged to the room. So you can't take it off, fill it up, and put it back, and you can't claim that you haven't used anything. And I'm sorry, I didn't have the chocolate bar, because they're all censored.
Yeah, sensors.
And you've never made money out of mini bars until we've got a full control on them, like a vending machine.
Excellent. So just looking at a bit at time, if anybody in the audience has any questions, feel free to start dropping them in the chat or in the Q&A. But let me start kind of getting some kind of closing remarks, at least from the speakers. Thank you once again for joining us. I think we've learned quite a few lessons. Chefs are not accountants. The importance of stock. Well, and we need to account. Well, we need to bear that in mind, right? The importance of stock taking. That's going to be very, very important, and also, as well as including or thinking about wastage or pilferage as part of your entire menu costing. But let me hand it over to you guys. Maybe see if we can get some closing remarks from Sean, from Ben, from Mark. If you guys want to take it away.
Sure. I think I wrote a couple down before Alf. I think obviously stock taking is something I said a couple of times, but being organised, making sure you're doing a weekly stock take, daily on some items as well, where they be high cost or high moving, I think is important as well. Be honest with yourself. Like, use that time to get rid of ingredients that aren't moving as part of your range, and think about how you can use different ingredients in other parts of your menu. Train your team. Like all these systems that we talk about, FoodRaiser is an incredible system, but it needs humans at the moment to put figures in, right? So train your team to make sure they can count appropriately. Look at different suppliers on a seasonal basis. Always look at your supply chain, where it's coming from, making sure that your supply chain is improving your brand and not just keeping it pretty stable. Use the reporting systems inside FoodRaiser to talk with your ops teams on a weekly basis and make sure you control your cost of goods. And then follow up. Like, it's so important to follow up with your team and make sure that they understand the importance of cost of goods. They understand that it can blow out, and that a 5% change in cost of goods can really mean that business does not keep going. So that's why I love technology like FoodRaiser, because it allows people visibility into what is happening with their cost of goods, and I think that's only a good thing.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. Thank you for the kind words also.
No problem.
Ben.
Sure. I just want to say thanks for having me on with these really cool guys. But it's really interesting that I've only seen like the restaurant industry from like the smaller, I would say smaller relative to what you guys do and what like the big hotel chains do. And it's very fascinating hearing the comments that you guys had, and I resonate with, especially with the chefs not being accountants. But I think it's very important that, you know, I have thought about this for many, many years, like while I was working under these guys, like, why isn't this in, because I never went to culinary school. Like, they went to culinary school in France, like Cordon Bleu, whatever, the CIA in New York City, in New York. Like, it's not part of their curriculum or something to know like basic math even, besides multiplying by 3 or 4. And I was just like a little bit appalled in a way, like, so I really like hearing that feedback. And with all these new technological advances, especially in Manhattan, where I saw like even my point of sale system, it really helped me see all the data. It really helped me guide my pricing decisions, really helped me alter my menu to stick with things that people like to buy, you know, and adjust prices on things as the seasons changed, as, you know, time went on. And I think those kind of things were not as available on our old restaurant systems. I think it was called Micros. That was like the most common system, Micros. And I feel like either chefs did not leverage that data, did not know how to use it, or it just wasn't really thought about. But
wow.
Yeah, but like these kind of platforms, especially like FoodRaiser and stuff, I think it, you know, that's the way to help restaurants succeed. Really help to see and visualize the data, because that's what's going to drive profitability, success, you know? Yeah. That's all I have to say about that.
Thanks, Ben.
Wow. Hey, thanks for bringing us back there to Micros. Micros Fidelio. That's about 20 odd years back. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's good. Beautiful. You're right, though. And I go back to my youth, and I remember at 21 years of age, I got my restaurant that I was working at a resort. It was a golf resort, and Micros Fidelio is the Rolls Royce, right? So but we had a person in those days. We had a person that was the purchasing officer, and every single thing that person, every invoice. We don't have that today, but I remember back in those days, and I remember watching an item on Micros hit the button, and then I was curious, so I'd get down into accounts and see what was going on with sales mix and all that sort of nonsense. And you know what, that was advanced in its day, and we still haven't learned from it. We still don't do it today. But back in those days, we even had a person in the office pushing this stuff through. So yeah, I know what you're talking about there. Thanks for sharing, Ben. Look, and I've enjoyed the chat today. I suppose we've learned that one size doesn't fit all. I've covered the hotel industry, sports stadia, bit of F&B in varying factors. I love my client base by the fact that every day is different, and each one of them has a different outcome. They all have a different P&L that they require. And the last phone call before I took this was a client that runs a sauce company, and it's moving over to Singapore, and it's a very exciting program. But their chef, who is 50% shareholder in this business, provides me invoices, and I do the analysis, and I pull it back, and I've provided him with the costing of his bottle of 120 ml chili sauce. And I can tell you now, whilst it's very good, he had no idea. He had no idea. It'll be a successful business nonetheless, but there you go. So great fun. Thanks for sharing, Sean, too. I really enjoyed hearing about your history there.
Thank you. Likewise.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. One last chance for any questions or any comments in the chat. In the meantime, let me thank the speakers once again, and we'll be following up. So if you want to hear more about or learn more about Executive Compass, or Open Pantry, or even Sean's podcast, I will be sending out those details later. And if you would like to speak or get to know the speakers a bit more, with the permission of the speakers, we'll also be sharing their LinkedIn, so you can reach out to them. Excellent. Well, I'm not seeing any questions right now, and we're at time in any event. So let me close it and let me wrap it up for now. Thank you once again, you guys. This was super helpful, super informative, and yeah, hope to see you guys very, very soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
everybody.
Appreciate it.
Everyone. Cheers.
Bye-bye.